Have you ever imagined pouring your youth into your family, only to discover they've written you out of their will? That's the gut punch Sapphire, 32 years old, faced while sifting through papers in her family's two-story home in Boise, Idaho. For 8 years, she worked 2 jobs, paid the mortgage, fixed the roof, and managed bills to keep the family afloat. But one afternoon, among her mother Xenia's documents, Sapphire found the will, the entire estate, the $400,000 house, savings, and heirloom wedding ring, was left to her brother Nolan, 28 years old, who still leached off their parents. Not a single line mentioned her. Sapphire's heart shattered as sleepless nights and missed opportunities flashed before her like a knife. Will she keep sacrificing, or stand up to reclaim herself? Sapphire sat motionless at the dining table, the will lying before her like a death sentence. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the cold words, each one hammering her chest. The house, where she'd climbed ladders in snow to patch a leaking roof, where she'd stayed up past midnight balancing bills, now belonged to Nolan, her brother who'd never paid a single electric bill. She gripped the paper's edge, nails digging into her palms, trying to suppress the tidal wave of emotion surging within. It wasn't about the inheritance, it was about recognition, a small sign that her years of sacrifice meant something. But no, this document made it clear, she was the outsider in her own family. Xenia's soft footsteps echoed from the hallway. Her mother entered, hands still dusted with garden soil, her familiar smile fading the moment she saw Sapphire holding the will. "Sapphire, you," Xenia faltered, her gaze darting away. Sapphire stood, her voice trembling but sharp as a blade. "Mom, is this true? Everything, the house, the money, Grandma's ring, all for Nolan? Not a word about me?" Xenia blinked, her hands clasping tightly as if to steady herself. "Don't misunderstand, Sapphire. Nolan needs support. You're different, you're strong, you've always managed on your own." Xenia's explanation hit like a cold wind, blowing through Sapphire's already fractured heart. Strong? She was strong because she had to be, because no one else stepped up when bills piled up, when the roof leaked, when her parents needed care. William, her father, appeared at the living room doorway, his coffee mug trembling slightly in his hand. He sighed, as if this were a minor misunderstanding. "Sapphire, don't make a big deal out of it. We just wanted Nolan to have a good start. You've got a steady job, you don't need this." Sapphire let out a dry, humorless laugh. "A steady job? Do you know I worked 2 jobs, gave up my dreams to pay the mortgage on this house? Do you know I drove through a blizzard to get Mom's medicine?" She held up the will, her hand shaking. "I don't need the money. But I need to know why I've been erased, like I never existed." The room grew heavy, as if the world itself held its breath. Then the front door swung open, and Nolan strolled in, his jacket stained, his eyes as vacant as usual. He paused, sensing the tension. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone indifferent. Sapphire turned, her eyes blazing. "Nolan, what do you know about this?" She thrust the will in his face. Nolan shrugged, but a fleeting smirk crossed his lips, tightening Sapphire's heart. "Oh, that. Yeah, you deserve to know. I suggested Mom and Dad write it like that. You don't need the estate, Sapphire. You always manage, right? I just wanted to make sure I had a safety net." Time seemed to stop. Nolan's confession was the final knife, slicing through the last shred of hope in Sapphire's heart. It wasn't her parents' sole decision. Nolan, the brother she'd sheltered, whose phone bills she'd paid, whom she'd defended through his failures, had deliberately cut her out. She stared at him, not with anger but with a deep, aching pain, as if seeing a stranger. "You asked them to do this?" Her voice cracked, but her gaze remained icy. Nolan shrugged again, as if it were no big deal. "You're the strong one, Sapphire. I just thought I needed it more." Silence swallowed the room, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. Xenia began to cry, but Sapphire felt no pity. William muttered something about not meaning to hurt you, but his words drifted like a passing breeze. Sapphire placed the will on the table, her movements slow, as if laying down a decade of sacrifice. As of today, she said, her voice calm to her own surprise, I'm not paying another cent for this house. No bills, no repairs, nothing. Nolan, you want it all? Then you take responsibility. She locked eyes with him, unflinching. Prove you're worth what you've taken. Nolan opened his mouth to speak, but Sapphire's gaze silenced him. Xenia stepped forward, reaching for her hand. Sapphire, don't do this. We're family, but Sapphire pulled away, her eyes cold as ice. Family? Family doesn't cast each other out, doesn't erase each other like this. She turned to William, her voice low but cutting. You think I'm strong? Good. I'll be strong, but not for you anymore. She walked out of the room, each step tearing at the invisible chains that had bound her for years. Outside, the sunset blazed red, as if the sky itself burned with her pain. Sapphire drove away from the house, her heart still stinging from Nolan's cold confession that her own brother had asked their parents to write her out of the will. She declared she was done, that Nolan, who inherited everything, could take responsibility. But back in her small apartment, the dim glow of the living room lamp couldn't dispel the emptiness. She thought silence would follow, that her family would respect her decision. She was wrong. The storm was just beginning, arriving as texts, calls, and eventually public accusations, each a dagger aimed at dragging her back into her old role as the family's unconditional savior. The next day, her phone lit up with a message from Xenia. Sapphire, the electric bill's due this month. Can you send the payment? I'm not good with these things. The tone was gentle, familiar, as if yesterday's confrontation never happened. Sapphire stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the keyboard. Part of her wanted to respond, to explain she was no longer the one to carry the load, but a stronger, sharper voice whispered, "Don't. They know what they did." She locked her phone, leaving the message unanswered in digital limbo. But her silence only fanned the flames. Less than an hour later, William called. Sapphire, the heating system's acting up again. Can you call the repair guy? I don't have their number. His voice was casual, as if asking her to fix things was a given, as if she were still the daughter who'd always rushed to help. Sapphire sank onto the couch, her mind reeling. These weren't just requests for money or effort, they were a declaration that her family didn't take her decision seriously. They still saw her as a tool, a cog in the family machine, expected to run endlessly without acknowledgement. She opened her laptop, checking her bank account, where the meager balance reminded her of dreams deferred, a graphic design course, a photography trip to Colorado. Every bill she'd paid for the family was a piece of her future traded away. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and told herself, I don't owe them anything anymore. But the family didn't stop. 3 days later, a text from Nolan appeared, brief but cutting. What are you doing, Sapphire? Refusing to help Mom and Dad over a piece of paper? You're more selfish than I thought. The word selfish pierced her heart, stirring memories of times she'd blamed herself for wanting to live for herself. She recalled nights she'd skipped outings with friends to balance family bills, moments she'd sheltered dreams because the family needed her. But this time, she didn't let the word manipulate her. She replied, her tone icy, if you think taking responsibility for what you've claimed is selfish, then go ahead and think that. The house is yours. Deal with it. She hit send, her heart pounding, not from fear, but from a fragile, newfound sense of freedom. A few days of silence followed, and Sapphire began to hope her family had gotten the message. But then, one morning, a text from an old friend, Lila, arrived. Sapphire, your mom posted something on Facebook. You should see it. With a sinking feeling, Sapphire opened the app, and her heart stopped. Xenia's post appeared, paired with a photo of the family home at sunset, captioned with emotional weight, when your children turn their backs on their aging parents, a mother's heart breaks. We sacrificed everything for Sapphire, but now she refuses to help, leaving our family in hardship. The post had over 50 shares, with comments from strangers, "So sad when kids are ungrateful," or "She probably only cares about money." Sapphire felt blood rush to her head, not from anger, but from a deeper pain, the agony of those she loved twisting the truth to paint her as a traitor. It didn't end there. William posted too, his tone somber but no less sharp. "We thought Sapphire was family first, but when we needed her most, she chose silence. This house, where she grew up, is at risk, and she doesn't care." Nolan added his own, dripping with sarcasm, "Some people act strong, but when family needs them, they walk away. That's independence for you." Each post was a knife, not just for their lies, but for turning Sapphire's quiet sacrifices into a public mockery. She scrolled through comments, seeing strangers who'd never met her judge her as a disgraceful daughter or greedy. Part of her wanted to shrink, to vanish from the world's gaze. But a stronger part refused to break. Sapphire sat in her apartment, the desk lamp casting light on her tear-streaked face, no longer weak but resolute. She remembered confronting Nolan, his smug look as he said she didn't need the estate. She recalled nights spent awake paying bills, moments she'd abandoned her dreams to keep the family safe. They hadn't just taken her efforts, they were now stealing her reputation. She opened her phone, scrolling through old texts from Xenia and William, their endless requests. Each was a reminder, they didn't see her as a person, but as a bottomless bank, a fix-it machine. The night in Boise was quiet, but in Sapphire's small apartment, a storm was brewing. The phone screen's glow stemmed her eyes as she scrolled through her family's venomous posts, Xenia's tearful lament, William's somber accusations, and Nolan's biting sarcasm, all painting her as a heartless daughter abandoning her aging parents and struggling brother. Each word was a brick in a wall of lies, meant to cage her, to shame her back into her old role as the family's silent savior. But Sapphire was done hiding. The accusations, the public humiliation, had ignited a fire in her chest, not anger, but resolve. She wouldn't let their twisted narrative define her. As the city slept, Sapphire sat at her desk, surrounded by old receipts, bank statements, and screenshots, ready to reclaim her truth. This wasn't just about proving them wrong, it was about proving to herself that she was worth more than their indifference. For days, Sapphire had wrestled with whether to respond. Part of her, the part that had spent years swallowing her own needs to keep the family afloat, urged her to stay silent, to let the storm pass. But another part, forged in the pain of betrayal and tempered by the courage she found when she walked away, demanded she speak. She opened her laptop, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat on a blank page. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was about to do. She wasn't just writing a post, she was rewriting her story, carving out space for her voice in a world that had tried to silence her. She started by uploading a scan of the will, its cold words stark in the digital light, all assets, the $400,000 house, savings, the heirloom ring, left to Nolan. Not a mention of Sapphire. She attached bank statements, each line evidence of years pouring her paychecks into the mortgage, utilities, and home repairs. She added screenshots of old texts, not the recent demands she'd ignored, but earlier ones where Xenia thanked her for saving the day and William called her the glue holding the family together. The irony of those words now tasted bitter. Then came the words. Sapphire poured her heart onto the page, each sentence a release from the pain she'd carried alone. "For 8 years, I gave my family everything," she wrote. "I worked 2 jobs, skipped vacations, shelved my dreams to keep this house standing. I thought love meant sacrifice, that family meant giving without expecting anything back. But when I found the will, I learned the truth, my sacrifices were invisible to the people I loved most. I was erased, not just from their estate, but from their hearts. And when I stepped back, refusing to be their ATM any longer, they weaponized my silence, painting me as the villain to the world. This is my truth, I gave until I had nothing left, and I'm done letting their lies define me." She paused, tears blurring the screen. The words were raw, torn from her soul, but they were hers, unapologetic, unbroken. Before posting, Sapphire hesitated. She imagined the fallout, whispers from distant relatives, judgment from strangers, the chance her family would hit back harder. But then she thought of the girl she used to be, the one who stayed up late balancing the family's books, who drove through rain to fix the heater, who believed her love would one day be seen. That girl deserved to be heard. Sapphire hit post, and the world shifted. The post went live in Boise's quiet night, but its ripples spread like wildfire. Within minutes, notifications flooded her phone, likes, shares, comments. Friends from high school, coworkers from her accounting job, even strangers reached out. "Sapphire, I had no idea you went through this," her old friend Lila wrote. "You're so strong for speaking up." A former neighbor commented, "I always saw you fixing their house. They don't deserve you." Each message was a balm, soothing wounds she hadn't realized were still bleeding. By morning, the post had over 200 shares. A local artist she'd met at a community event shared it, writing, "This is what happens when families take love for granted." Sapphire's story is a wake-up call. Comments poured in, some from others who'd faced similar betrayals. "My parents did this to me too," one wrote. "Thank you for giving us a voice." Sapphire read each one, her heart swelling with a strange mix of grief and gratitude. For the first time, she felt seen, not as the dutiful daughter, the fixer, the provider, but as a person with a story worth telling. The support wasn't just validation, it was a mirror, reflecting the strength she'd doubted she had. She sat on her balcony, Boise's cool air brushing her cheeks, and let herself cry, not from pain, but from the relief of finally being heard. Her family's response was swift and telling. Xenia's post vanished from her timeline, replaced by a vague photo of flowers captioned about healing. William locked his account, his digital presence evaporating like a ghost. Nolan, predictably, set his profile to private, but not before a mutual friend sent Sapphire a screenshot of his final story, a black and white image of a stormy sky, captioned, "Some people only care about themselves." Sapphire stared at it, waiting for anger, but felt only pity. Their avoidance, Nolan's dodge, her parents' retreat, showed they couldn't fight back because the truth was undeniable. The will, the receipts, her words had stripped away their facade, leaving them exposed to the harsh light of reality. The impact stretched beyond her family. A Boise news outlet ran a piece on the story, calling it a cautionary tale about family dynamics and gratitude. Sapphire's phone lit up with a message from a community organizer, inviting her to speak at a women's empowerment event. "Your courage inspires," the message read. Sapphire blinked at the words, hardly believing they were about her. Courage? She'd spent years feeling like a shadow, her worth tied to what she could give. But now, standing in the aftermath of her post, she realized, courage wasn't just speaking out, but believing she deserved to be heard. In the days that followed, Sapphire's post kept spreading. A stranger from across the country messaged her, saying they'd cut contact with their toxic family after reading her words. A coworker slipped her a note, "You're not alone. Keep shining." Sapphire began to see her pain as a bridge, not a burden, a way to reach others who'd been silenced. She saved every message, not as trophies, but as reminders that her voice mattered. One evening, sipping tea and watching the Boise River reflect the city's lights, Sapphire opened her laptop again. The post was still circulating, but she didn't reread it. Instead, she started a new document, titled Unbound. It wasn't for the world, just for her, a place to record the lessons she was learning, the dreams she was reclaiming. She thought of the will, now a distant memory, and realized it hadn't destroyed her, it had freed her. By speaking her truth, she not only dismantled her family's lies but found a new family, one built on respect, not obligation. And as the stars twinkled over Boise's sky, Sapphire knew this was only the beginning. After Sapphire's post rippled through Boise, sparking waves of support and silencing her family, she felt a profound shift. No longer the girl trapped in the glass cage of family duty, she stood before a new door, one leading to herself. The praise from friends, messages from strangers, and community recognition had kindled a fire within her, but it was only the beginning. Sapphire knew that to truly live, she had to rebuild her life, not from the ashes of old sacrifices, but from the dreams she'd once set aside. In the gentle dawn of Boise, Idaho, she began a journey of self-discovery, step by step, with a courage and joy she'd never dared believe were hers. Her small apartment, once a place where she stayed up late balancing family bills, became a sanctuary of creativity. She enrolled in an online graphic design course, a college dream buried under the weight of her family's financial burdens. Each evening, she sat at her screen, learning to blend colors, arrange layouts, and create images that told stories through lines and light. For the first time in years, time belonged to her. The hours spent studying weren't just about skills, they were bricks in the foundation of a new Sapphire, not the sacrificing daughter, but an artist reclaiming her voice. She started taking on small freelance projects, designing a logo for a local coffee shop, creating posters for an art event. Each completed project was a victory, a reminder that she could create something beautiful without needing her family's validation. Boise, with its tree-lined streets and shimmering river, became the backdrop for her rebirth. She joined an art club at the community center, where she met people who didn't know her past, didn't know she'd paid the mortgage, fixed the heater, or been erased from the will. To them, she was just Sapphire, the woman with a warm smile and a sketchbook always in hand. She befriended Mira, a ceramic artist with green-dyed hair, who invited her to weekend farmers' markets. Strolling through stalls brimming with fresh fruit and handmade crafts, chatting about art and life, Sapphire realized family wasn't just blood, it was the people who made you feel seen. With Mira and her new friends, she laughed more, no longer carrying the shadow of obligation. But what gave Sapphire the greatest sense of freedom was writing. One night, with moonlight spilling through her window, she opened her laptop and started a blog called Unbound from Family's Curse. She wrote about the years of being taken for granted, the pain of discovering the will, and her journey to rediscover herself. Her posts weren't just confessions, they were beacons for others wrestling with toxic relationships. She shared how she learned to say no without guilt, how she found joy in small things, like buying a new camera to capture Boise's river sunsets. The blog quickly drew readers, from young people in Boise to strangers in distant cities. A woman in Seattle messaged, "Your writing gave me the courage to leave a family that always made me feel not enough." Another commented, "Thank you for reminding me I'm worthy of love." Each message tied Sapphire to a new community, not the family she'd known, but the one she chose. The change wasn't just external. Inside, Sapphire felt a lightness she'd never known, as if she'd shed a heavy armor she hadn't realized she was wearing. She began making time for things once deemed luxuries. She saved money, for the first time, not for family bills, and put a deposit on a photography trip to Colorado, where she planned to capture the blazing gold of autumn leaves. She bought a sapphire blue dress she'd always loved but never dared purchase, because money was always for more important things. Each small choice was a declaration: she deserved to live, to enjoy, to be herself. The quietest moments came in the late afternoons, as Sapphire wandered through in Morrison Park, her camera dangling from her shoulder. She snapped fleeting moments, a dog chasing a ball, an elderly couple holding hands on a bench, sunlight glinting off the water. Photography became her way of seeing the world through her own lens, undistorted by others' expectations. One day, while editing photos in her favorite coffee shop, she received an email from a local gallery inviting her to display her work in an upcoming community exhibit. "We saw your photos on Instagram," the email read. "They tell a story, and we want to share it." Sapphire read it over and over, her heart racing with joy and disbelief. She, who once thought she had nothing to offer but money and effort, now had something the world wanted to see. But it wasn't all easy. Some nights, Sapphire lay awake, memories of her family lingering. She recalled Xenia's smile as they baked Christmas cookies, William's warm voice telling old stories, even Nolan's silly jokes that once made her laugh. The pain didn't vanish entirely, it softened, like a scar that twinged when touched. But whenever she wavered, she opened her blog, read her readers' comments, and remembered she was no longer the girl who existed to serve. She was Sapphire, an artist, a friend, a woman learning to love herself. One morning, as she sipped coffee and sketched ideas for a design project, her phone buzzed with a message from Mira. "You have to see this." Mira sent a link to a Boise Art Forum post, where someone had shared Sapphire's photos with the caption, "This woman's photography tells wordless stories. I want to know who she is." Sapphire smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. She no longer needed her family to define her worth. The world was seeing her, not through the lens of what she'd given, but through what she created. In the golden glow of a Boise sunset, Sapphire stood by the river, feeling the cool breeze weave through her hair, as if whispering that she'd found freedom. The months since she exposed the truth and rebuilt her life with long-buried dreams had taught her that happiness didn't lie in her family's validation, but in living fully as herself. Yet, as she walked her vibrant, self-claimed path, her family, Xenia, William, and Nolan, began to face the cracks they'd once ignored, cracks Sapphire had filled with her sweat and sacrifice. The two-story house, once a symbol of her duty, became a mirror reflecting the consequences of their irresponsibility. In that collapse, Sapphire found a profound awakening. Family wasn't blood, but mutual respect and love. With a heart both light and resolute, she stepped into a new chapter, no longer haunted by the past, but guided by her own light. The house on Maple Street, where Sapphire had poured her youth to keep standing, now showed signs of decay. One morning, as she sipped coffee at a downtown Boise cafe, she received a message from Helen, the neighbor who'd lived next to her family for over 2 decades. "Sapphire, your mom asked me about selling the house," she wrote, her tone worried. "They got a letter from the bank, a foreclosure warning. Seems they can't manage anymore." Sapphire set her phone down, her gaze drifting to the window where autumn leaves fell quietly. She wasn't surprised. Without her to pay the mortgage, fix the plumbing, or call repairmen when the heater broke, the house, and the family inside, crumbled under their own weight. Nolan, handed everything in the will, now faced a reality he was unprepared for: mounting bills, flickering electrical systems, a leaking roof no one knew how to patch. News of her family trickled in, not from them, but through snippets from acquaintances. An old friend, now a real estate agent, texted Sapphire that the house was listed for $370,000, below its value due to its poor condition. "No buyers," he wrote. "The roof needs replacing, the wiring's outdated, and Nolan doesn't have maintenance records." Sapphire read the message, feeling neither triumph nor pain, only a strange detachment, as if the house were now a painting from her past, no longer tied to her. She remembered nights climbing the roof in biting wind, calling repairmen at midnight. That effort had once chained her to her family. Now, with those chains broken, they had to learn to stand, or fall, on their own. Nolan, who'd once smugly claimed he needed the estate more than Sapphire, spiraled under responsibilities he couldn't handle. Helen shared that Nolan had moved back in with Xenia and William, bringing chaotic bags of belongings and a surly attitude. "I saw him arguing with your mom in the backyard," she said. "He blamed the bank, but everyone knows the real issue." Sapphire pictured Nolan, his smirk that had once pierced her heart, now facing calls from creditors, overdue bills, and his parents' disappointment. She didn't revel in his failure, but she felt no pity either. He chose this path, and now he has to walk it, just as she'd chosen hers. Xenia and William, meanwhile, seemed to age rapidly. Someone at the farmer's market told Sapphire that Xenia had tried to sell the heirloom wedding ring, willed to Nolan, to cover debts. "Your mom looked worn out," they said. "She said she can't sleep, worrying about the house." William, once the calm man with a morning coffee, rarely left home, as if hiding from reality. Sapphire listened, but her heart no longer ached as it once did. She'd once believed family love was unconditional, that she had to save them no matter how they treated her. Now she understood love didn't mean sacrificing herself for those who didn't value her. Sapphire's awakening came slowly, like dawn filtering through trees. One afternoon, strolling through Julia Davis Park, she paused by an old oak, its rough bark telling stories of time. She thought of her family, not with anger or regret, but with newfound clarity. Family wasn't those who shared your blood, it was those who saw your worth, who didn't turn your kindness into obligation. She'd once feared leaving her family would leave her alone, but now she saw she'd found a new family, not in Xenia, William, or Nolan, but in herself, her new friends, and the readers of her blog who drew strength from her story. One day, as Sapphire organized photos for a new project, she received a handwritten letter from Xenia, sent by mail. The pale blue envelope, marked with her mother's shaky handwriting, made her heart skip. Inside, Xenia wrote of sleepless nights, regret for not acknowledging Sapphire, and fear of losing the house. "I don't know how to start over," she wrote. If you're willing, I'm still here. Sapphire read, her fingers tracing the words, and for the first time in months, a tear fell. Not from pain, but from realizing she no longer needed that apology to move forward. She folded the letter, tucking it into a small wooden box with other keepsakes, not to forget, but to remind herself she'd overcome. She stepped onto her balcony, gazing at the Boise River shimmering under moonlight. She thought of the Maple Street house, now possibly sold or still rotting from neglect. She thought of Nolan, learning harsh lessons about responsibility. She thought of Xenia and William, facing the consequences of choices they'd thought were right. But those thoughts no longer weighed her down. She'd chosen her path, one that didn't lead back to that house, but to a future where she was the center of her own story. A week later, Sapphire spoke at an art workshop in downtown Boise, sharing how photography helped her heal. As she spoke, the audience, young and old, hung on her words, as if she were telling their stories. An older woman approached afterward, took her hand, and said, "Young lady, your story is a light for those who thought they had to sacrifice forever." Sapphire smiled, her heart warm. She didn't need her old family to feel whole. She'd found purpose, not in saving others, but in living true to herself. And as she left the workshop, Boise's lights shining like stars, she knew she'd finally come home, to herself. Sapphire transformed the pain of being erased from her family's will into a flame that lit her path to freedom, proving that true family is built on respect, not just blood. From Boise, she teaches us that sacrifice isn't a duty, but a choice, and sometimes, choosing yourself is the most honest form of love. Will you stand up or keep sacrificing in silence? Share your thoughts in the comments, hit like if this story touched you, and subscribe to catch more inspiring journeys. Your support is the wind beneath our wings, helping us create deeper content and spread meaningful messages together.